What do you do when your own wife laughs with a crowd while calling you awful in bed, and the only person who defends you is her best friend who once slept with you in secret? How do you stay calm when her version of the story makes you the villain, while every recording, every message, and every bank line quietly proves something very different? Can quiet preparation and the law put your dignity back where her jokes tried to bury it? Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. My name is Corin, and by the night of that rooftop party, I already knew something in my marriage was cracked, but I still hoped it could be fixed if I stayed calm. The day started in our small apartment kitchen, with the kettle boiling and 2 mugs on opposite sides of the counter. My wife Lena scrolled her phone while she told our 8-year-old daughter, Mila, that we were going to Mom's party on the roof, and that Dad would try not to be boring this time. I smiled like it was a harmless joke, because asking why she needed to say it in front of our child felt like starting a fight before breakfast. Mila asked if there would be cake, and I told her there was always too much cake when her mother planned something. For a moment, we felt like a normal family, until Lena sighed and told me to loosen up tonight and not kill the vibe like last time. At work, I spent the morning pretending to care about numbers and shipping routes while my thoughts sat on the evening ahead. I pictured the rooftop bar with its loud music and bright string lights, and Lena's friends with their phones out, laughing at stories where I was the quiet punchline. I told myself it would be fine if I kept my mouth shut and smiled when needed. When I got home to change, Lena was already in a black dress, taking selfies in the mirror and asking if she looked hot or just tired. I told her she looked beautiful because she did and because I meant it. She rolled her eyes, said I sounded like someone's dad trying to flirt, then shouted for Mila to hurry so we could drop her at my parents' place before the party. The rooftop bar was crowded, with music thumping and the smell of perfume and smoke in the air. Lena's friends were gathered around a high table, drinks already lined up, phones in their hands. They shouted her name when they saw her, pulling her into the circle like she was the star of the night, and I followed a step behind. She introduced me again as the serious one, who kept the bills paid and spreadsheets neat, and everyone laughed politely. Someone pushed a drink into my hand, something too sweet, and I took a slow sip while they talked about followers, clients, and drama I did not care about. Mara, her best friend, stood beside me, quieter than the rest, holding her glass with both hands. We shared a small nod, the kind you give to someone who knows more history than anyone wants to discuss at a party, then turned back toward the group. For a while, it was just noise. People shouted over the music, took photos under the string lights, and complained about work. I kept to the edge of the group, answering simple questions, listening to Lena laugh louder than she needed to. She was in her element when a room watched her. After a few drinks, she climbed onto a small step near the railing and lifted her glass like she was giving a speech. She thanked her friends for being there and called them the only reason I stay sane living with a walking spreadsheet, pointing her glass toward me. Everyone laughed, and I tried to give a small, good-natured bow, even though my cheeks were hot. Then someone shouted that she should tell a real story about our marriage. Lena's smile changed just a little, turning sharper, more focused. She leaned on the rail, looked around at the little crowd, and said she had a confession. In a clear voice, loud enough for nearby tables, she said her husband was absolutely awful in bed, and that she was a starving woman living with a dry piece of toast. The group howled with laughter. A few people leaned in to see my face. I saw at least 2 phones pointed our way, tiny red lights, and lifted hands. My throat went dry, and for a second I thought I might be sick. Every instinct in me wanted to shout that it was not true, to walk out, to knock the nearest phone to the floor. Instead, I stood there with the drink in my hand and tried to keep my face neutral. The music kept playing, but the sound around us felt distant. Even strangers at the bar turned to look. Lena spread her hands as if she were telling a funny story about someone else, enjoying the reaction. Before I could find my voice, Mara's voice cut through the noise, sharper than I had ever heard it. She said that Lena was lying, that if anyone should be complaining, it definitely was not her, and that I was actually amazing, and she knew that from experience. The laughter snapped off. For a heartbeat, there was only the music and the wind across the rooftop. Then people started to look back and forth between the 3 of us. Lena's eyes went wide, then narrowed. Someone near the bar whispered, asking if that meant I had slept with my wife's best friend. The phone in one person's hand did not drop. It stayed pointed in our direction, still recording. Lena moved quickly, laughing too loudly, saying of course Mara was kidding, that maybe I had bragged like a teenager, and that if I was amazing, she must have missed the proof. A few people laughed again, but the sound was thin now, confused. I kept my mouth shut, because I knew anything I said would be twisted by the time it reached the next group chat. On the drive home, after we picked up Mayla from my parents, the car was quiet until she asked why everyone had been laughing about beds and if she had missed a funny story. Lena told her it was just adult jokes and that Daddy was in a mood. I watched the road and said nothing until Mila asked if I was mad. I told her I was just tired from standing all evening and that it was not her fault. At home, I carried her to bed, kissed her forehead, and promised we would do something simple and quiet together soon. When I walked into our bedroom, Lena was sitting on the edge of the bed, scrolling through her phone with a little smile on her face. I could hear her own voice coming from a video, repeating the words "awful in bed" through the tiny speaker. I lay down beside her without touching her, staring at the ceiling while she typed replies and sent laughing emojis. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a text preview flash across her lock screen, showing a blurred rooftop image and an unknown number, before she tilted the screen away so I could not see the rest. A moment later, she stood up, took her phone, and walked toward the door without a word. The hallway light spilled in for a second, then the bedroom door closed behind her with a soft latch click, leaving me alone with the echo of her joke and the feeling that something important had just slipped away in that tiny sound. The next morning, I walked into the office already feeling like I was walking into a room where everyone knew a joke I did not want to hear again. The open-plan floor buzzed the way it always did, with people talking over cubicle walls and tapping on keyboards, but there was a different kind of energy in the air. I could feel it before I saw it. On my way to my desk, I passed a small cluster of coworkers standing by the coffee machine, heads bent together over a phone. I heard my own name, quiet and quick, then a short burst of laughter that ended as soon as they noticed me. They straightened up, said hello like nothing was wrong, and I pretended not to see the way hands moved to lock screens. At my workstation, I tried to fall into my usual routine. I opened my email, checked the daily shipment reports, started writing notes about delays in one region. Numbers usually calmed me, but that morning my eyes kept sliding to the top corner of my monitor where my phone lay face down. A notification buzzed. I flipped it over and saw a tag in a social app from one of Lena's friends, with a still frame from the rooftop bar. The title said something about when your husband is awful in bed, but you have a sense of humor. For a moment, my vision blurred, and I had to set the phone down. Across the aisle, Tessa laughed at something on her own screen, then turned her chair slightly so I could see a video playing. Even without sound, I recognized Lena's gestures and the background lights. I could read the captions clearly. I watched my wife call me awful in bed with her glass raised and saw myself standing in the background, half in frame, expression neutral. Tessa noticed my eyes on the screen and quickly closed it, saying she had just seen a wild clip and asking if I had ever had a video go viral. I said I preferred my life boring. She shifted in her chair and went quiet. Not long after, my manager Eli walked past my desk, his hand resting for a moment on the top of my cubicle wall. He mentioned that he wanted a quick word later in the day when I had a break. His tone was still friendly, but more careful than usual, like he had already rehearsed something in his head. I told him to send me a calendar invite, and he nodded, moving away. The rest of the morning felt like working under a thin layer of glass. I did my tasks, updated spreadsheets, replied to emails, all while hearing small pockets of quiet laughter and seeing screens tilt away whenever I came close. At lunch, I did not go to the break room. Instead, I stayed at my desk with my headphones around my neck, not playing anything, just needing some kind of barrier between me and the rest of the floor. I opened the tag from earlier and watched the rooftop clip with the sound turned down low. Lena's voice came through clearly enough. She told the same story, called me awful in bed, and the comments below were full of laughing emojis and strangers giving advice. Some people wrote that if she was still with me, she must be desperate. Others said she should upgrade. My name was not in the caption, but my face was in the frame. I started a new spreadsheet on my work laptop, giving it a simple numerical file name so it would not catch attention. I listed the date, the username, and a short description of each post that mentioned me. I did not write anything emotional, only facts. I took a screen recording of the clip as I scrolled through the comments, making sure the time and account names were visible. When someone walked past behind me, I minimized everything and opened a normal shipment report, heart beating faster until they moved away. Then I went back to the quiet, careful work of saving what I could. The meeting with Eli happened mid-afternoon in a small glass-walled room near the back of the floor. He closed the door and sat across from me with his hands folded, trying to look relaxed. He said there was something he needed to ask about, and he glanced at his laptop where a muted tab clearly showed a paused video thumbnail. He asked if everything at home was okay and whether there was anything that might spill over into work or create issues with our policies. I knew he was choosing every word with care. I told him my wife liked to make jokes online, that I did not approve of this one, and that I understood the company's expectations. I assured him there was no violence, no threats, no illegal behavior, just something deeply embarrassing that I was trying to handle privately. He nodded, said he appreciated my calm, and reminded me that any complaints about harassment or workplace gossip should be brought to him. I thanked him and left the room feeling both exposed and strangely steady. After work, I tried to burn off some of the tension at the gym in the building next door. In the locker room, two men I recognized only from passing in the elevator were talking loudly. One of them held up his phone and said something about that poor guy whose wife roasted him online. Then he read the caption out loud in a mocking tone, repeating the phrase, "awful in bed." The other man laughed and asked what kind of person stayed married after that. They looked up when I walked in, and I saw the moment they realized who I was. I could have told them to say it to my face. I could have grabbed the phone. Instead, I opened my locker, changed in silence, and walked out. In the hallway, with the door closed behind me, I pulled out my own phone and searched for the account they had been looking at. When I found it, I took a screenshot of the clip and the username, saving it to a private album. On the way home, I stopped at a supermarket to buy groceries, trying to turn the day into something normal. In the checkout line, the cashier glanced from my face to her phone on the counter. I saw the rooftop video paused on her screen, the caption half visible. She gave me a quick, embarrassed smile and asked how my day had been, in a tone that suggested she already knew the answer. I told her it had been long. Behind me, someone in line whispered about that clip everyone is sharing. I watched the items move along the belt and counted them one by one to keep my breathing even. Back in my car, parked under the bright lights of the lot, I opened the social app again and saw that Lena had reposted the clip with a new caption about free publicity and how she loved being honest about married life. I scrolled through the comments until I found one from a mutual acquaintance calling me the problem. I took another screenshot and added it to the same private folder. It felt strange, almost cold, to think of these moments as pieces of something bigger, but I kept going. When I finally got home, the apartment was quiet. Lena was in the living room watching a show, laughing at something on the screen. Mila was already in her room, reading. I put the groceries away, answered Lena's casual question about my day with a short, careful reply, and did not mention the meeting with Eli or the strangers in the locker room. Later, when I sat on the edge of our bed to check my phone one last time, a new notification slid down the top of the screen. It was a group chat created by Lena's friends, with a nickname they liked to use for me. A short preview showed a rooftop screenshot and a line of laughing emojis. At that exact moment, Eli's calendar invite popped up on my laptop with a note about a quick word tomorrow morning, sitting there like a polite wait. I stared at the two notifications side by side and felt something inside me become very still. 2 days later, we had a family celebration at the community center that I could not avoid without starting another fight. Lena said her parents had booked the hall for a combined birthday and anniversary dinner, and she said it would look bad if I stayed home. I wanted to stay on the sofa and pretend the internet did not exist, but I told her I would go because Mila was excited about seeing her cousins. On the drive there, Mila sat in the back seat talking about balloons and cake, while Lena scrolled through her phone and muttered that she hoped no one was too sensitive for her jokes. I watched the streets go by and told myself that if I just stayed quiet, it might be a normal night. The community center hall was bright, with long folding tables covered in plastic tablecloths and a buffet against one wall. Children ran between chairs, and the air smelled like fried food and cheap candles. Irina and Dmitri greeted us at the door like nothing unusual had happened all week. Irina hugged Lena tightly and gave me a quick, polite touch on the shoulder, already turning away before I could say much. I noticed a few younger relatives glancing at their phones, then at me, then at Lena, with the kind of look people use when they have already chosen a side in a story they only heard in pieces. We all sat at a long table. I took a seat near the middle so I could help Mila with her plate. Lena sat diagonally across from me, next to her mother, with her phone face up beside her. At first, the conversation was about work and school. Dmitri asked how my job was, and I told him about a new routing system we were testing. He nodded, but I could see his attention drift whenever Lena opened her mouth. She lived for moments when people waited for her next line. It did not take long for someone to bring up the rooftop bar. A cousin laughed and asked if Lena had any new material after her big performance. Irina turned to me and said she heard I took it badly when Lena tried to lighten the mood. Lena smiled and said she had just told the truth about our bedroom, like a brave wife. She said some men could not handle honesty. There were little snickers around the table. I felt Mila's shoulder press against my arm. Lena leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table, and said she would tell the story for the relatives who had not seen the clip yet. She retold the rooftop moment in a smooth voice, making herself sound like a clever comedian and me like a ridiculous, stiff man who did not know how to touch his own wife. She left out Mara's outburst completely. She said that I just stood there like a statue while everyone laughed, and that it proved how bad I was at everything personal. I listened to my own life being turned into a stage act, my hands flat on the table. When she repeated the words awful in bed, I saw a few people glance at Mila, who was busy picking peas off her plate, not really listening. Irina shook her head and said no wonder Lena had problems at home. Dmitri said a man had to take criticism if he wanted to improve. No one asked if the story was true. No one asked how I felt hearing it again. I said nothing. I watched Lena's hands and the way her eyes shone every time the table laughed. Later, someone at the far end of the table pulled out a phone and suggested Lena should do the bit again so they could send it to a friend who loved that kind of humor. The person angled the phone along the length of the table like a stage. Lena laughed and said she was not sure, then pretended to be shy for 1 second before slipping back into performance mode. I saw the small red dot on the screen. It meant the recording had started. She repeated her lines about being starving and living with cold toast, waving her fork like a microphone. I was in the corner of the frame, trying to keep my face unreadable. I excused myself after that, saying I needed some air and that I would take Mila outside for a bit. Irina frowned, but did not stop me. At the attached playground behind the hall, the evening light was softer. I pushed Mila on the swing while she talked about school. After a few minutes, she went quiet and said that one of her cousins had told some classmates that her mom said her dad was bad in bed. She did not understand what it meant, but she knew it was supposed to be funny. She asked if it was a joke, or if she should feel sorry for me. I told her gently that adults sometimes say things they should not, even when they think it is just entertainment. I said that whatever people joked about, she did not have to pick a side between her parents. I tried to keep my voice steady. While she ran to the slide, I pulled out my phone and opened the social app again. A new notification showed that a relative had already posted a short clip from the table with the caption about honest wives. I saved the video and took a screenshot of the account, then closed everything before Mila ran back. Soon my parents arrived, walking across the grass. Anya looked at my face first, then at the hall behind us. She asked quietly if Lena had started again. I said she was just entertaining the table. Hugh watched Mila climb the ladder, his jaw tight. Anya told me in a low voice that she had seen the rooftop clip from a cousin and did not like what it meant. She said that when stories about a person repeat too many times, people stop hearing them as jokes. She asked if I was going to just sit and let it go on forever. I said I did not want a scene, especially in front of Mila. She answered that sometimes not having a scene did not mean there was no damage. As we talked, Mara came out through the side door, holding her own drink too tightly. She looked pale and tired. She stepped closer and said she wanted to apologize properly for what she had said at the rooftop bar. She said she had not meant to make things worse, that she was just tired of pretending, and then she stopped when she noticed my parents. Her eyes jumped from my mother's face to mine, and she swallowed her next words. She said she hoped I would at least understand that I was not the only one uncomfortable with the way Lena used me for jokes. Then she turned away when another relative called her back inside. When we returned to the hall, dessert had started. Plates of cake passed down the table, children grabbed extra pieces, and the noise rose again. I took my seat near the middle, with Mila between me and my mother. At the far end, a young relative stood up on a chair, banging a spoon on a glass and calling for a toast. They shouted that Lena had to do the bedroom joke again for the clip because someone had missed it. Phones rose like a row of small mirrors. In one of them, I could see my own reflection, tired and still. The flash from a camera went off, washing the table in white for a split second while the person on the chair led a chant for Lena to start. I did not move or speak. I simply watched the glowing screens, memorizing who held them, knowing that every laugh and every recording now had a date and a face attached in my mind. I knew the evening at my in-laws' place was going to be a trial long before we walked through their front door. Lena called it a family dinner to clear the air, but the way she said it on the drive over sounded more like she expected a verdict. Mila sat in the back seat with a book, swinging her legs and humming. Lena scrolled through her phone and said her parents were worried about her after all the stress I had caused. I asked what she had told them, and she shrugged, saying she had just been honest about how hard it was to live with me. I let the silence sit between us for the rest of the ride. Irina opened the door with the same bright smile she used for guests she wanted to impress. She hugged Lena tightly, whispering something in her ear, then gave me a short nod and a quick pat on the arm. Dmitri appeared behind her, already smelling of cologne and wine, clapping me on the shoulder and telling me it was good I had finally decided to show up. Their living room was warm, with family photos on the walls and framed certificates for Lena's old school awards. It was a room full of stories where I was never the main character. We sat around the dining table with Mila at the corner, coloring on a paper placemat. For a few minutes, the talk stayed on safe topics. Irina asked about Mila's school, Dmitri commented on the food, Lena showed everyone a photo of the community center event like it was a highlight reel. Then Irina turned to me with a serious face and asked if I had had time to reflect on my behavior. She said her daughter had been very open about the pain I had caused her, and she wanted to know if I understood why Lena needed to vent. Lena leaned into this as if she had been waiting. She reminded everyone that I had once slept with her best friend, leaving out that it happened during a separation after one of our early huge fights. She said she had forgiven me on paper, but never really healed, and that was why she joked the way she did. She said her jokes were the only way she could feel powerful in a marriage where I made her feel small. She glanced at me like she was daring me to argue. Irina shook her head and said that no woman joked like that without a reason. I took a slow breath and answered the way I had been rehearsing alone in my head. I said that I had made a serious mistake years ago, that it had been one night with Mara when Lena and I were separated and barely talking. I said I had never pretended it was nothing, that I had apologized, and that I had never repeated it. I spoke quietly, not raising my voice. Irina crossed her arms and asked if I really thought one apology erased the hurt. Dmitri said a man had to accept that a woman would express herself when she had been betrayed. It might have stayed in that familiar loop if Lena had stopped there, but she pushed further. She told her parents that living with me was not only boring, but sometimes uncomfortable, that there were times she had not really wanted to be close to me, and I had not cared enough. She used careful words, but she left enough gaps that anyone listening could fill them with darker ideas. She said she felt pressured in ways she did not like to talk about in public. Irina's eyes hardened. Dmitri looked at me with disappointment that felt heavier than anger. My stomach twisted, but I did not slam my hand on the table or stand up. Instead, I repeated slowly that I had never forced Lena into anything, that I had always backed away when she said she did not want something, and that I refused to let her turn our disagreements into something they were not. I said I was done being the silent villain in every story she told. Lena rolled her eyes and told her parents I was gaslighting her and making her doubt her own feelings. The word hung there like a label. At some point during the noise, everyone stood to take dishes back to the kitchen. I stayed seated for a moment and watched Lena's phone, lying on the table near my plate. A new message popped up from Mara. The preview showed a line about being tired of keeping up the act, and a suggestion that if Lena really wanted people on her side, she might have to pretend it was worse than it was. Before I could read more, Lena returned, grabbed the phone, and locked it. I did not touch it. I only memorized the phrase and the time. Later, my parents arrived for dessert. Anya hugged Mila, then came to stand by my chair. She looked from Lena's bright face to mine and asked quietly in the hallway how much had been said already. I told her Lena had talked about my old mistake and hinted at things I knew were not true. Anya's mouth tightened. She said lies repeated often enough started to sound like memories. Hugh greeted everyone politely, but I saw his eyes settle on Lena when she laughed too loudly at her own story. After dessert, when the plates were cleared, I said it was time to take Mila home for school the next day. Irina tried to convince us to stay longer, saying we were making it awkward by leaving early. I said calmly that I wanted Mila rested and that this felt like enough talking for one night. On the ride back, Lena accused me of trying to make her look bad to her own parents. She said I had embarrassed her by playing the victim and that if I kept performing like that, she might have to be more blunt about what life with me was really like. I did not answer. Mila pretended to sleep in the back seat. At home, Lena went straight to the living room to type on her phone, probably retelling the evening in a version where I was cold and ungrateful. I walked into the kitchen, opened a cabinet, and pulled out a thin binder labeled Utilities. On the surface, it looked like a normal stack of bills, but inside I had slipped printed screenshots from the rooftop clip and the family posts that repeated the story. I added fresh pages I had printed at work, each showing another caption or comment. I slid them in, careful and neat. Then I took a small USB drive from my pocket, one I had labeled with the date, and taped it under a larger folder marked Taxes. I carried my pillow down the hall to the guest bedroom. The bed was already made with spare sheets. I set my phone on the nightstand and sat down slowly, feeling the weight of the evening settle in my chest. The room felt small but clear, like a space where at least the stories belonged to me. I turned off the overhead light and sat in the dim glow of the lamp, listening to the quiet hum of the apartment. A soft knock came at the door. Mila stepped in, rubbing her eyes, asking if I was sleeping in there now. She asked if it meant that I did not love her mother anymore and if we were getting divorced. I told her I loved her very much and that sometimes grown-ups needed space to think and calm down. As she stood there, my phone on the nightstand lit up silently with a muted call from a number labeled private. I let it buzz without touching it, the screen glowing in the corner of my vision. I focused instead on Mila's small, worried face and told her that whatever happened, I would always be her dad, and that was not going to change. The call went to voicemail, the light faded, and in the quiet that followed, I realized I was done trying to fix everything by staying still. The next few days felt like walking on a floor that creaked in new places every time I took a step, but instead of trying to tiptoe, I started paying attention to where the noise came from. On Saturday morning, I took Mila to the park playground while Lena slept in, claiming she needed rest after a long week of drama. The sky was pale and the air cool, and most of the parents stood in small clusters, looking at their phones while their kids ran around. I pushed Mila on the swing and watched two mothers nearby glance at me, then at a screen one of them held. I did not need to see the video to know what they were watching. They whispered, and one of them let out a short, shocked laugh, covering her mouth. When they noticed my eyes on them, they both turned away, pretending to talk about something else. Mila leaned back as the swing moved, hair flying, and asked if I was still mad about the jokes. I told her I felt tired of being turned into a character when I was a real person, but that none of that changed how much I loved her. She said someone at school had repeated her mother's line and asked if I was really awful. I felt something twist inside me, but I kept my voice steady. I told her that people repeat things they hear without understanding how they hurt, and that grown-ups sometimes use words they should keep private. She nodded slowly, then asked if things would stay like this forever. I told her no, that grown-ups had ways to make changes when something was wrong, and that I was starting to look at those ways. While she ran off to climb the slide, I walked toward the notice board near the entrance of the community center that shared the same lot. A faded flyer for the recent family event was still pinned there with the date and time in the corner. I took a quick photo of it with my phone, then snapped another of the board as a whole. It felt like collecting puzzle pieces without knowing the full picture yet, only that I would need them. Back on the bench, I opened my calendar and added a small entry on a date 3 days away. Old Town Cafe, 9:30 a.m., marked only as meeting personal. I added another reminder for the same day labeled paper drop without any further notes. The words looked harmless on the screen, but they made my chest feel tighter. On Monday at the office, I stopped pretending that I could ignore everything. During lunch, instead of joining any conversations, I went to an empty corner desk no one used and opened my personal email from the browser. I had brought a small stack of documents in my bag, copies of our lease, a recent gas bill, and a bank statement with both our names on it. I scanned them using the office machine, then emailed the files to myself. Back at my own desk, I saved them into a cloud folder I had created the night before, titled only Archive A. Another folder, Archive B, waited beside it. I started moving in the screenshots and screen recordings I had collected, compressing them into simple files with dates instead of descriptions. As I worked, my browser tabs briefly showed searches for storage options, delivery tracking, and notary near me. Each time footsteps approached, I minimized everything and opened a normal spreadsheet or report. My heart pounded when Tessa stopped by to ask if I wanted coffee, but she did not look at my screen, and I answered calmly that I was fine. When she left, I reopened the tabs and wrote down a couple of addresses in my notebook, adding them to the same page where I kept dates and locations of Lena's stories. The notebook was small enough to fit into my jacket pocket, and I felt its weight as I went through the rest of the workday. After work, instead of going straight home, I sat in my car in the parking garage where the concrete walls made everything sound hollow. I put on my headphones and placed my phone on the dashboard, then called a number I had saved under a simple emoji instead of a name. When the call connected, I spoke in a low voice, explaining that my wife had been making repeated public statements about me that were not true, that videos were circulating with my face in them, and that our daughter was hearing comments at school. I did not raise my voice or add dramatic details. I stuck to dates and patterns. The person on the other end asked calm questions about what exactly had been said, where it had been posted, how often, and whether I had copies. I told them I did. They explained in careful terms that there were structured ways to address that kind of behavior, that written records mattered, and that anything concerning our child's exposure to it was important. I wrote down key phrases in my notebook: documented pattern, public repetition, child impact, formal steps if needed. The call ended without any rush toward action, only a suggestion that if things continued, I might want to consider specific processes. I sat there for a while with the engine off, looking at the words I had written. The air in the garage smelled like oil and dust. Above me, I could hear distant traffic. I put the notebook away, feeling less like a victim drifting through jokes and more like someone quietly walking down a hallway with doors on either side, finally reaching for one of the handles. At home that evening, my parents came over. Anya carried a small container of food, as if this were any ordinary visit, but her eyes moved quickly over the separate cups on the counter and the way our bedroom door was half closed. Hugh walked slowly through the apartment, taking everything in without comment. In the kitchen, Anya asked if I had a plan. I told her I was gathering information, setting boundaries, and talking to people who understood the system better than I did. I told her I was determined not to scream or throw anything, just to make sure I had everything in order if I needed to act. She nodded and said that calm did not mean weak, and that sometimes the quiet person at the table was the one who had done the most thinking. Lena came into the kitchen halfway through this, leaning against the door frame, arms crossed. She asked what we were whispering about, and said she hoped we were not plotting against her. She reminded my mother that I had been the one to betray her first, and that she was just telling her truth. I said in an even tone that there was a difference between speaking about pain and inventing details that spread like stains. Lena laughed and said if I could not handle a few jokes, I should not have done what I did. My father's jaw tightened, but he did not speak. After they left for the evening, he squeezed my shoulder at the door and said quietly that if I had proof and felt my daughter was being dragged into this, I should protect her properly, not just in my head. That night, I moved the rest of my clothes into the guest bedroom. I opened the small box in the closet and placed a single USB stick inside, labeled only with the current date. It held updated copies of every clip, every screenshot, every post that used my name or my image. I checked the folders Archive A and Archive B on my laptop one more time, making sure the files were synced. A small pop-up appeared in the corner of the screen, telling me file uploaded successfully. I closed it and shut the lid. Later, in the kitchen, Lena stood by the counter scrolling through her phone, laughing at a message. She told me someone had made a new meme about our marriage and that I should lighten up and share it. She said I should be grateful she was honest, because lots of women just cheated quietly. I leaned against the other counter, feeling the cool surface at my back, and looked at her. I told her I had reached the point where I was done arguing in living rooms and at dining tables. I said I was going to handle this properly now, in ways that did not involve shouting matches or edited stories. She scoffed and asked what that was supposed to mean, saying no one would believe me over her. Before I could answer, my phone on the counter buzzed with a small alarm. The screen lit up with the reminder I had set earlier. Paper drop. At the same time, the old printer in the corner, which I had tried to use earlier and thought I had turned off, suddenly whirred to life and spit out a single blank page onto the tray. The sound made both of us look over. Lena frowned at the empty sheet and then at my phone, still glowing with the alarm label. I silenced it with one tap, met her eyes, and repeated that I was done trying to win arguments with jokes. How things were handled next would not happen on rooftops or in comment sections. It would be done in a way that did not care how loud anyone laughed. Lena thought we were going to the courthouse for a mediation meeting that would finally show everyone how controlling I was. She said it with a kind of excited dread on the way there, dressed like she was attending a serious interview, hair perfect, makeup sharp. I drove in silence, feeling the weight of the clipboard on the passenger seat. Mila stayed with my parents. Anya had agreed to keep her out of whatever happened. Irina met us on the sidewalk, linking her arm through Lena's and saying professionals would see the truth once they heard her side. Mara stood a few steps away, hugging herself, eyes on the glass doors. Inside the lobby, light from the tall windows fell across the polished floor. People sat on benches, some nervous, some bored. I stood with my clipboard, the top sheet showing only the word statement, and watched Lena check her reflection in her phone. She asked if I was ready to finally admit everything. I said I was ready to let the right people see everything, not just the edited parts. A man with a folder stepped forward, checked a paper, and called Lena's full name. She smiled at him, assuming he was part of the mediation staff, until he held out the envelope and said he was there to serve her. For a moment she did not take it. Then, with everyone watching, she grabbed the papers and tore them open. The first page clearly stated what she was holding. A divorce petition with temporary financial and possession orders, including a clause about not disparaging each other or speaking of the other as abusive in front of our child or online. Irina snatched the papers, scanning the words, color draining from her face. Mara whispered that she had already signed a short statement about what really happened years ago. Somewhere behind us, an elevator bell chimed and a clerk called, "Next case." I nodded to the server, turned toward the doors, and walked out into the light, leaving her voice and the echo of my own name behind the glass.